Hello everyone, welcome back to the third edition of NES Vocalized. I'm here with my host Mariam Ahmad.
Hello.
And our guest for today, Faris.
How's it going?
And today we're going to be discussing the diversity of thought, open-mindedness, different types of thinking, and what we like to call the elastic mind.
So state of the elastic mind.
Okay.
There's ice to be broken when there are words to be spoken. If you've thought about it, then we've talked about it. Vocalized.
So I'm gonna start by asking you, Faris, what does abstract thought mean to you?
Well, going by the standard definition of abstract, which is something which is in the physical realm, abstract thought to me is thoughts which I think most of us have in the majority of our time. You know, we fantasize about things which aren't existent. It's what motivates our creativity.
Okay, abstract thought. I don't know what it means to me. I think there's not much I can add to what Faris said. What takes up the majority of our time when we think, but what we don't really tend to tell other people that we think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, a lot of the thoughts are things that are very personal to us, and I don't know about you guys, but with me, a lot of thoughts that I have are things which are personal to me and many things which I could really understand in their full context.
Exactly.
And that's what makes them special to us as individuals, I think.
What's abstract thought to you?
See, the reason I like this discussion is because we're kind of like leaping off the deep end with this question. Because the whole point of abstract thought is that no one knows what it is. You know, there's no concrete definition for it, and that in itself is abstract. It's sort of meta question in that sense. But I like this question a lot because no one, it's different for everyone. I bet no one watching this would have the same answer.
You could say it's an abstract discussion.
Yeah, exactly. It's an abstract question.
Yeah, we're out here meta. One of the reasons that I elected to get Faris on this episode for the discussion of abstract thought is because, well, other than my affinity for the way that he carries out a conversation, is that over the weekend, correct me if I'm wrong, you attended a conference held by Nuqat celebrating...
So Nuqat is, I probably should just explain what Nuqat is first. Nuqat are a organization centered on mainly cultural development. They started in 2009, but they started out centered on the development of art and the development of the art scene in Kuwait. Over the past 10 years, they've been expanding into cultural development. And every year they used to host conferences with different themes aimed at, boosting cultural and intellectual developments in both Kuwait and in the region. So this year they were celebrating 10 years, and their theme this year was State of the Elastic Mind. The conference is still happening. It's over the course of 10 days, but during the weekend I volunteered for the talk aspect of it, where they brought a bunch of speakers from Kuwait and from the Middle East, and even from places across the world. And, they each had very broad, sections that they spoke about in their field of expertise. They spoke about, ranging from politics to physics. It was all very, very fascinating stuff.
Really quick, I'd like to say that as of the recording of this episode on Thursday, the 28th of November, 2019, Nuqat is in no way affiliated with the New English School. That could change, but as of right now, that remains the status.
Yes.
Wait,
completely
why do we have to
separate.
say that?
Legal purposes.
Okay, got it.
Yes.
Nuqat, please don't sue us.
I volunteered with them individually. It was probably the highlight of my life over the past month. Honestly, it was
a short life.
Well, yeah.
In your own experience,
right.
How would you say that freedom of expression or freedom of thought, or just not necessarily freedom, in a sense that it's being suppressed or anything, but just the encouragement of dialogue and discourse and discussion to find out, truth and greater perspective. How would you say that is being stifled?
I actually had a conversation about this a while back. I think it's because freedom in general is being stifled. Freedom of speech, freedom of identity, because the core values or the core kind of things we look for as a generation has changed so much over the past maybe 2 decades, and so what everyone looks for clashes. What our generation values as a belief or what we view as freedom clashes with what other generations view as freedom, and that point is kind of ambiguous in the sense that no one wants to approach it because it sparks such a clash, I think.
I would agree with that a lot, and I would, especially from my personal experience, a lot of the things which I used to discuss were very controversial topics. I won't specify further, but a lot of the time, because I think that politics and sociology is an interesting talking point amongst my peers. Whenever we talk about things like that, and it does get controversial, people do get afraid of essentially getting into arguments, because I think a big part of, in the social aspect, putting other things aside about suppression of speech, I think the social aspect of that, we're afraid to anger each other, and that we're very afraid of essentially taking things very personally, because a lot of us like to make our political views and political opinions, as an example, something which is very directly a part of our core personality. And I would agree with that to an extent, because a lot of your values and a lot of your norms and your background does influence your political opinion. But then when we attack those, we do, of course, thus take it very personally, and we see it as an attack on ourselves,
right?
Which isn't the way we're supposed to be doing it, and it creates things like political tribalism, for example, because then we start having what we have in the Western world today, which is
like
these 2 camps, and you're either here or you're there. You're either Democrat, Republican, Conservative, Labour. So essentially, we're very much in this state of right or wrong, which isn't very suitable, considering, tying back to what Mariam said earlier about people wanting different things. You can't treat a field like that where there's multiple interest groups and multiple different factors behind the reality of what's going on, and you can't treat that in a very objective, black and white sort of manner.
Okay, 3 things, because that was a lot to build on. Okay, first of what I'm going to say is about people being afraid to argue their point, just being afraid to offend anyone. I think that an important part of maturity is to be able to argue your side, because what you said was correct in the sense that a lot of where you come from, your background, your culture, influences your political opinions. So I think another element of the discourse that sort of detriments it, or is a detriment to it in a little bit, is that when people are bringing their political views to the table or to the stage or the debate or whatever the forum is, they're bringing a reflection of themselves. They're bringing a reflection, a collection of their past experiences, their thoughts, their emotions to a table. And once that's invalidated, in a sense, the people who reject those views are saying, no, that's not correct. Your experiences are not true. Your points are invalid. Everything that you've gone through, I disagree. I disagree with your personality as a whole. So when people are afraid to get their views and their experiences rejected, they can't change as political personalities. So if you have a political opinion, let's say you go through a traumatic experience, right? And it changes you from one side of the political spectrum to another. Say you were against something, you find out that someone in your family is for that thing, they go through an experience with that thing, and then you have a change of heart and a change of mind, and then now you switch to the other side of that. If you are presented with information that contradicts that, it doesn't just contradict the viewpoint, in a black and white sense, it contradicts that experience. It's a subconscious thing that I think is very underlooked in political debate. The second thing is that, hang on, give me a second, I lost my train of thought. We can cut this part, it's fine. Another feature of arguments or discussions or any type of discourse in general is that the entire goal is a pursuit of truth.
Originally, yes, I would agree. I think that's what turns a civil discussion into an outright mess,
right,
is the change in objective, right? Because in a civil discussion, in my opinion, is when there's a common goal which both parties or multiple parties want to work towards by means of working together, right? That's when a democracy works, when you have people in government who are willing to compromise for the, ideally for the sake of a better country, for the welfare of the state. However, that starts to get, essentially morphed when you have things like pride, essentially, which get in the way.
But yeah, arguments in their purest form are supposed to be, I'm right, you're wrong. Now, the spins on those are different from person to person, and they can morph how an argument ends up playing out. And then lastly, I wanted to get down to your point about how, it just creates these two sides, this left and right, if you will, right? It's known for two people who know it as polarizing. It's polarizing a debate or a topic. And it can have drastic effects because, as bad as or as vicious as we've made arguments out to be in the last few minutes, people want to be a part of it because you cannot make change, you cannot make your voice heard if you don't fight a little bit for it, right? You can't make noise unless you're loud, right?
That's the problem.
People want to be involved in arguments, but what the problem is now that once you're involved in arguments, in order to make your voice heard, you've got to lean far. People, if you've noticed,
it's only the extremists,
right?
Yes.
Centrism and moderatism, hard to hear. Arguably the most logical, in my opinion, they are, but it's hard to hear. So you end up with the loudest voices coming from the two most extreme sides of any given spectrum or any side of a debate, and it ends up creating this toxicity where if you're not for it all the way, you're not for it at all.
Yes.
I was just gonna say that you have the voices in the center who are kind of are affected by the extremes of their side. And a lot of people are quite centrist in their ideas. Extremists aren't the usual, but what you see now and what you see with the appraisal of the internet as well is any civil argument turns into both extreme sides of the spectrum just shouting at each other, and you have people in the middle who are kind of I don't know what to do right now.
They're deafened by it at this point.
Exactly. And it just puts people off having the conversation. We're talking about elastic minds, right? And we're talking about open arguments and discussions. But at the end of the day, those just morph into the exact opposite of what it is to have an elastic mind, just shouting and not listening to each other.
And what's worse is, obviously this doesn't apply to every case, but you can make the case that since there's some truth on each side of the spectrum, right? Obviously there is, because there are people on both extremes, so there has to be some truth, at least to them, in their viewpoints. The people who are closer to the middle are there for a reason. It's because they can see validity in both sides, right? So
Absolutely.
You can make the case that, it's not conclusive, but you can make the case that the people who lean towards the center the most are the most diligent and the most impartial when it comes to a topic, because they can recognize the truth in both sides regardless of whether it's painted red or blue. Just to zoom back to the Nuhat conference for a second.
Way back.
What a tangent. Yeah, but that's the beauty of this thing. So just to zoom back to the conference for a second, you told me a while ago that there was one part of the conference where you were given prompts. Each two of you were given prompts, and you had to go find a person and have a discussion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Somewhat. I'm going to correct you there.
Okay.
But basically, I thought this would be really interesting considering that you guys are a podcast. So basically, there's an exhibition side to the conference. And the talks weren't mandatory. You could go outside if you wanted to, and they had a screen and you could watch the talk. And so one of the things you could also do besides the talk was an exhibition. One of the things that they had was this podcast stall. I believe they were called Wow in between. That's the letter Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And also, we're not affiliated with them in any way. Just thought I'd specify that.
Yep. Double check.
So they're a podcast too, and they have this stall with 2 empty chairs and some recording equipment in between with these placards, these prompts. And so you would find a stranger or a friend of yours, whoever, and you sit down and you just have a discussion, and you have these little prompts, and you just ask each other questions, and they record what you say, and they'll take snippets of what people are saying, and they'll find it interesting, and they might even find a topic about it to feature in their next episode, which I just thought was very interesting, because this is a case of literally people saying, listen, find someone that you don't know, you never heard of in your life, sit down and realize the fact that, they are human beings as well. And, they might be just as uncomfortable as you are about talking to a complete stranger. They might see you as a complete stranger, but it's insane the amount we can change our perspectives just by sitting down and talking and realizing that we're both humans. And at the end of the day, mostly we all want the same things for ourselves and for each other.
Then why don't we do it?
We don't do it because we don't give ourselves the chance to realize that.
I think that was a really good point you made, Faris. But my take on this was that we don't get the chance to, not just because we don't give ourselves the chance to, but because no one else does. We're all consumed by what's in our hand, what our surroundings are, what our bubble contains. Our phones, our families, and our friends in our school, and that's it. You don't really get to sit around with people from complete different walks of life all the time and just have a proper conversation, because people don't have that access to, as much as technology has helped us become globalized, it's also kept us in a bubble, and
absolutely.
And that just stops us from having face-to-face conversations, which is why this podcast is such a great opportunity for people to kind of stir these thoughts in their brains, which they might not get to say out loud.
You mind repeating that for me?
No, you only get it once.
Okay.
You got it.
So
a lot of the time it's just a matter of people just not wanting to. A lot of the time it's a lot easier to talk to relate to interact with someone who has the exact same views as you, who thinks the same way that you do, and who has the same thought patterns as you do. That's why commonality breeds affinity. That's why we like people who are like us. So it's a lot, sometimes it's just difficult. Sometimes people just don't have the courage. People fear what they don't understand and what they don't know. A lot of the times people are made uncomfortable by what they can't agree with, especially with topics that are a lot more sensitive, topics that are rooted in personal experience and family experience and, things like religion, things that are very sensitive to people. People won't go out of their way to talk to someone unless they're intellectually curious. They won't go out of their way to talk to someone who has completely different views than them.
I'm not sure who it was that told me this, but I was told that smart people are people who are willing to go out and have a conversation and are willing to change their minds completely about a topic regardless of how set they are on it. And that plays on what you said. Not everyone wants to go out of their comfort zone. Not everyone wants to test their ideology and have this kind of elastic mind that we've been talking about, because it's a lot easier to just think I'm right and you're wrong. And that goes back to just having people on either side of the spectrum shouting at each other.
I'd like to call that more open-mindedness rather than just intelligence. But what I will say is that because of that open-mindedness and that willingness to expand your horizons and learn more, you become more intelligent.
Yeah.
So I would,
Exactly.
I would say that
Open-mindedness
being
is a smart
or
thing.
being intelligent, part of that is being open-minded, because
Exactly.
you can't learn unless you do have that quality.
Exactly.
a lot of what you're saying is resonating with me, because I always try to think about what is the barrier to why people don't want to learn about what other people think. And I'll admit, when I was a bit younger, and I was cocky and arrogant, I used to think I know everything. What's the point of hearing other people's views? But then I also realized, and I'm not saying this applies to everyone, but I think it's a big factor, which is relative, is people feel like they have something to prove. At the time, I felt like I had something to prove, and I felt like I had to prove that, essentially. Just, saying like, oh, I'm smart, I'm this and that. And I think it's because everyone wants to feel like they have to stand out, and everyone feels like they have to have something different to offer to the world, because there's like 7 billion of us now.
Yeah.
We have to find a way to stand out in some way. But little do they realize, it ties back to what you said earlier about making noise. It's the people who make noise who are heard these days, right? And I think it's the people who want to be, seem as if they're very individualistic and very in their own way by being loud, not listening to others. And basically sort of playing the role of like a preacher. So essentially, I think, so that stems a lot into things like insecurity. And I think what you said a lot about upbringing, for example, is a big part of that, because if you're in environments which are very pressurizing, and environments where you really do feel like you have to prove yourself, like in very competitive environments, then that really does contribute in constructing these very toxic and very sort of, what would you say, competitive personalities, if you will.
If you've thought